Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really zeroing in on just one specific viewpoint, pretty strong one, about entering a country without, well, authorization.
Yeah, we've got this written statement here. It's full of conviction, you could say. Really challenges the way things are often done.
Absolutely. So our plan for this deep dive is to sort of unpack the main arguments in this statement, try to understand the thinking behind it, and just explore the different sides of this very complex issue, but all through this one particular lens.
Exactly. And this statement, it doesn't really pull any punches. It starts right off with a scenario that's clearly meant to, get a reaction.
Okay, yeah, let's get into that start. The source describes a family, poor, fleeing injustice back home, and they arrive without the money or means for, proper travel documents.
Right.
And the statement just asks, point blank, is it really human to criminalize people like that, to deport them? It actually says it's sending them back to hell.
That's incredibly strong language. Hell. It really emphasizes how dire the source sees their original situation.
It definitely highlights the stakes.
It does. And the alternative it offers is, well, pretty straightforward on the surface. Instead of just criminalizing, it suggests creating proper documentation and basically folding these individuals into the system we already have.
So the idea is less about punishment and more about maybe administration, integration?
Yeah, that seems to be the core idea, yeah. Framing it as a practical challenge of integration rather than purely a law enforcement problem. It's pushing for a more humane approach as the source sees it.
And then there's this broad statement, having more people around is always more helpful. That feels pretty fundamental to this whole perspective.
It really does. It suggests a basic belief that immigrants, regardless of how they got here, are a net positive for society, for the economy.
It's quite an optimistic view on population growth, isn't it?
It is. I mean, the economists talk about immigration benefits, filling jobs, innovation, that sort of thing. But they also, usually bring up the need for infrastructure, integration support.
Yeah.
It's complex. This statement keeps it simple. More people equals more helpful.
Okay, so moving on, the statement directly addresses something that always comes up. What about undocumented immigrants who break other laws?
Right, a key point.
Yeah.
And the argument here is, okay, if they commit a crime, prosecute them. Use the existing legal system.
Just like you would anyone else.
That's the idea. Prosecute them, but don't automatically deport them just because they lack documentation on top of whatever crime they committed.
So it's questioning if deportation is always a proportionate penalty, especially if the crime itself isn't related to immigration status.
Exactly. It raises that question of proportionality. Should your immigration status mean a totally different set of consequences for the same offense? It touches on, ideas of equal justice, though immigration law obviously adds layers of complexity there.
Then the argument takes a turn, bringing in religion. It quotes, God said help who travel. That's because they're traveling for a good reason.
Yeah, this shifts the framing. It adds this moral, almost spiritual dimension.
So migration, especially if you're fleeing hardship, the good reason is seen as something morally supported, maybe even divinely approved.
That seems to be the implication. A kind of duty to help those on such journeys.
And it goes even further than that, doesn't it? It says, all the lands is God land for all human to live where they want.
Whoa, okay. That's a very, very broad theological claim.
It really is. It essentially argues for, a universal freedom of movement based on the idea that national borders aren't, divinely created divisions.
Right. From that specific religious standpoint, if all land belongs to God and is for all humans, then human-made restrictions on movement become ethically questionable. It challenges national sovereignty at a pretty fundamental level based on this interpretation.
Then the statement tries to connect this to U.S. history. It says the USA was made because they traveling, which seems to refer to, early colonists and immigrants.
It's tapping into that common narrative, the U.S. as a nation of immigrants. Trying to draw a parallel, maybe suggest a historical precedent for welcoming travelers.
But then it adds a twist. It claims some of those early travelers committed horrible crimes to stay there but never been prosecuted because there was no justice system.
That's quite a historical assertion. It's complex.
Yeah, it's a strong claim. What do you think the point is there?
Well, it seems like it's trying to preemptively counter the argument that immigrants might pose a danger by saying, look, maybe some did bad things in the past too, but then it contrasts that supposed lack of accountability back then with today.
Saying that now we have a justice system but it's being made unfair, specifically towards undocumented immigrants.
That seems to be the logic. The implication is sort of, we didn't hold some people accountable back then, and now we're being overly harsh and unfair to this group today. It's using history to critique the present system's fairness.
Okay, so let's try and pull these threads together. We've looked deep into this one viewpoint, and it really pushes back hard against criminalizing and deporting people who enter without authorization, especially if they're fleeing bad situations.
Yeah, we've seen this blend of arguments. There are the humanitarian concerns, the sending them back to hell idea. Oh. There's that optimistic belief about the benefits of more people. Then the legal argument about using existing criminal law, not just automatic deportation. And finally, that religious justification helping travelers, all land being God's land.
And that historical comparison to the founding of the U.S., trying to point out what the source sees as an inconsistency, a lack of fairness over time.
Right. It's definitely a perspective built on several different kinds of reasoning, emotional, practical, legal, theological, historical.
So for you listening, this really brings up some fundamental questions. Think about the values embedded in this source, that empathy for people seeking safety, the belief in human potential, the critique of perceived injustice.
What parts of this particular argument resonate with you? What questions does it leave you with about how a society should respond when people arrive without papers, especially when they say they're looking for refuge or just, a better life? It's definitely something to consider.